All right. Hi, Curt.
Hey.
Welcome to the Hall of Fame Fatherhood podcast. I'm
Yeah.
your host, Steve Mistovich, and today I'm joined by Curt Storring. Curt is a father of three, a husband of 10 years, the founder of Dad.work, a community of dads doing the inner work to become better men, husbands, and fathers. Curt, thanks for joining me. Looking forward to hearing your story and more.
Yeah, man. Thank you for the invite. I love doing this, and I love just talking before this about your story. And, being a young father, I thought I had it hard. And to hear yours, I was like, oh man, unbelievable. So I'm excited to just dive into whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah. First question would be just what's your origin story as far as a father? When did you become a father, and what did that look like leading up to becoming a father?
Yeah. So I got married when I was like just turned 23. And I had a lot of friends around me who were 5 to 10 years older, and they were married, they had kids, and which is very unusual for this day and age, I guess. Like most people's friends groups are, single typically, and they just continue on without kids for ages until they're in their 30s and 40s, which is sort of normal now. But for some reason, we had friends with kids, and we just knew it was the right thing to do. We knew we were going to be, very committed in marriage. We knew we were going to have kids, and we're like, okay, let's just start now. Let's just see what happens. And so looking back, I had no idea that there was such a thing as like inner work and healing and growth and any of this stuff. I just thought like, well, you just do it. Like nobody teaches you how, nobody ever get taught how. And so I'll just figure it out. So we just packed everything into this 1 year. Actually, we got married. My wife got pregnant. We both quit our jobs so we could move back to my hometown because that's where my family is. My wife's family just moved to where I was from. So it's like, okay, let's just go get the support of family. That sounds important. Yeah. But, moving 1,000 kilometers away, quitting jobs, having a baby, just being married. And then I was like, you know what? I'm not going to get another job. Like I hate having jobs. I'm just going to like start a business. And, that's extremely, in hindsight, it sounds like ridiculous to be like new father, new everything. Just like, no, I'm not going to get a job. So, thankfully my wife was supportive. I don't know how I could have done it otherwise, but it was just this like perfect chaotic storm. And so when my son was born, this was 9 years ago now, it was just miserable, man. Like I had heard people saying, this was the best day of my life. I love being a dad. Like it changed everything. Honestly, I felt nothing, like nothing at all. And it took me the better part of a year to finally go like, oh, there's a relationship I'm supposed to be having here. And I don't know what it was other than just my own emotional inaccessibility, not knowing anything about, expressing emotions. I was very cold and closed off, and I wanted to be super hard. And like, I thought that was cool. And it just like stopped me from even having like any heartfelt relationship with my son. And in that time, I mean, my wife and I were both going through this massive change. Probably in hindsight, again, there was some depression followed that period. And for me, being a control freak and a perfectionist at the time, having no control over anything anymore drove me nuts. And my coping mechanism was just to yell. Like I would get angry, I would yell, I would be scary and mean to my wife and my, like up until, well, I don't even know how many years it took, but I just think back at like this little baby toddling into my room, my office at home, and me just like yelling at him to get out. Like, can't you see I'm working right now? And it's like, dude, if I go back and shake that guy, thankfully I've got to the point where I could hug him and tell him it's going to be okay. But like, oh, it's so hard for me to think back to how painful it was because it was lack of control, couldn't make everything perfect, had, no support that I actually wanted, didn't know where to go for help, didn't know how to have a relationship with my wife, and everything was miserable. And so it was from like the worst possible start that I could imagine in my life, that this entire fatherhood journey sort of grew. And I think that it was because I was so miserable that I decided that there had to be something else. And it took a long time for me to figure that out. But, through whatever grace I received, it's like, man, I finally got into this understanding that, oh, maybe it can be different than this because I suck at doing this. And I honestly hate my life doing this. And that was like, that was a hard place for me to be because I was young, I was optimistic, I was ambitious. And here I was like hating every day of my life. So that really sucked. So that's where I came from. And I'd be happy to dive into sort of how it evolved from that if you want. But that was sort of the origin story of my fatherhood experience.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Well, yeah, I'd love for you to dive deeper. But first, like in my experience, becoming a father at 18, we didn't get married and, the relationship just dissolved and all that. But we did have a lot of family support on both sides. And that was really huge in my situation. How did having that support, your wife's family moving to your home city and you're having your family there, like how did that help in coming to this realization and making the transition?
Man, honestly, it probably was a good thing, but I honestly don't think that it was at that time. I felt like I wasn't supported in the way I wanted. There was the relationships that we have with our parents have taken a lot of work to heal and to make transparent. For a long time, everyone was sort of operating above board. Nobody was touching on the very obvious elephants in the room from, our own childhood, the ways that we wanted to be supported. And I had no ability to ask for what I needed. And it's literally taken me up until like the last year even to finally have the courage to accept those childhood wounds and have discussions with, my mother, and to open up the dialogue with our parents and just be like, these are some of the things that hurt. And here's how I now request, if you can do it, to support us. This is what would feel good. At the time, we just sort of thought we had to accept whatever was there. The emotional intelligence wasn't necessarily high on either side, and I'll take full responsibility for that. And, it was probably good to be able to have someone to just like be there once in a while to have the kid or to watch the kids. And yet I just felt inherently, like just deeply alone, regardless of the amount of support we had. And so it ended up being, again, if I look back, I'm grateful for the fact that people were there and wanted to be there, because I know a lot of families where that's not the case. And in my immature childlike mind at the age of 23 or whatever that I was still in, I felt like a boy, to be honest. I just wanted more, I wanted better, and I didn't know how to ask for it. So yeah, like it was a mixed bag, to be honest, and it's taken a lot of work to get there, but we are now getting there. And that's a really wonderful point in our lives where we can be like, hey, I forgive you. I know you're doing your best, mom, dad, whatever. And I'm really grateful that you're here because I see in all of this your love. And so now we've got to the point where we're building those relationships back up, which is a really beautiful place to be. But man, it probably took being in the shit with them when we were younger, as younger parents, to finally get to this point. And it was just something that we were able to reflect on, my wife and I, going like, does this feel good? Is this the support we really want? Like, are we just supposed to accept whatever comes? And like, can we ask for more? I don't know. There's like all those questions. And thankfully my wife and I do talk like that quite a lot with one another. But yeah, that was our support group.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing. And if you would dive a little bit deeper into, like, did you go searching for the books, the tools, the tricks to make the transition to, wanting to be present and, a better father? And who were those people or books that you first came across?
Yeah, man, this is my story started with meditation, but it wasn't meditation because I thought I needed it. It was meditation because I was following this business dude. I was building my business, was following along with this guy who had some good stuff to say. And one of his like blog posts, this must have been, I don't know, like 7 years ago now, was like, hey guys, I've been trying this meditation thing and I'm way more productive. You should give it a try. And I was like, ooh, productivity hack, like sweet, let's go crush this. I'm an entrepreneur. Let's just like, hustle, hustle, hustle. And so I tried meditating so that I'd be better at business. And I used Headspace at first, great app. I used that for years. And I remember the first 10-day challenge. It was like a free challenge. I was like, okay, I'm going to give this a try. At the end of the 10th day, I remember walking out of my office at home, and my oldest son did something. Like, he triggered me every single thing he did. There was something special about our relationship where he just knew exactly what to do to trigger me. And so he did something, and I wish I could remember what it was. I'll have to like meditate on this to figure out what exactly it was. He either threw a toy or like yelled at me or something like that. And any other situation, I would just screamed at him. And in this situation, after 10 days of meditating, I stopped and I breathed and I caught myself, and just these like fireworks went off in my brain. Like, oh my goodness, there's another way to do this. I didn't know you could ever get better at this kind of stuff. And so from that moment, I just started like devouring everything I get my hands on. So I continued meditating. I looked up, what is meditation? Why is it working? What the heck is going on here? Started thinking about, the nature of consciousness, started journaling, started reading about people who were doing these things to become more calm. And once I even had this knowledge that it was possible, it's like suddenly the slate was completely clean and I could start going deep. So I just like Googled a bunch of stuff. I was like, how do you be more calm? Could you be more calm? What about meditation? What about journaling? And I just, through that cascading effect, I found all sorts of things like breath work, even just like box breathing or slow breathing or deep belly breathing, things that can actually help you in the moment and then make you feel better later. I probably tried like, I don't know, 20 different types of meditation and ended up just picking something that worked for me. And journaling was huge for me. And books, man, like I've got on my website actually a list of the 25-ish best books that I've read in my journey that were most impactful. And so I won't go through them all, but it's on the Dad.work website. And man, some of these were just blowing my mind. And I eventually got to a place, and I think one of the first books that I read that really tapped into the deep inner work I needed to do was Healing the Shame That Binds You. And that was an insanely valuable book to me. It started going through the shame that we pick up as children based on our family of origin that leads to certain behaviors. And as I was reading through this book, I was like, oh, this guy's talking about me. Like, I do this and I do this and I do this. That's amazing to know it's not just me, and it's not just inherently who I am. And so from meditation to finding this book to going deeper in that, I started realizing that I had the power to heal things and to grow and to actually set my own agenda for my life and be an author of my life rather than just being a passenger. So that was like the first step, was this business meditation. And man, I didn't stop. Like, there was twists and turns. It was like a roller coaster, honestly. But along the way, we traveled. We lived in Thailand for almost 2 years. We lived in Bulgaria for a bit. We went around the world. And that in itself was like we were gone for 2 years, and we like to say it was like 20 years of parenting and marriage packed into two, just because when you put yourself in a hard environment like that, and I know Traver talks about this, like, do hard shit, right? Like you have to do hard shit to grow. And man, that was some of the hardest shit we ever did. So that was wonderful along the way. And it really got me a lot of rock bottom, to be honest, in some of the darkest times of my life. But from that, I was motivated to stick around and to do the real work and to really face my responsibilities. And I came away understanding that, all the wounds, all the trauma that I experienced, they weren't my fault. And I was the only one who's responsible for doing anything about them, because no one was coming to save me. So that sort of dichotomy stopped me from feeling guilty and shameful and blaming myself and victim mindset, and was just like, okay, here's what's real. Now, what are you going to do about it? So that was, I wish I had a list of like all the crazy stuff I tried to heal. There's like a whole bunch of different meditations and breath works and tapping and, plant medicine journeys and all this kind of stuff. And, along the way, it worked. It literally worked. And I almost hate to say that, because it's like, it almost sounds arrogant. Like, oh yeah, you think you don't have any more work to do, but that's not what I mean. I'm just no longer the angry, miserable, mean, reactive father I used to be. I'm calm, confident, and I'm a leader now. And that's like just who I am. So, I love sharing this because I think it's a message of hope, because I felt hopeless so often in my journey. And, for men and dads listening to this, there's always a way through it. And it's not usually a way out of it. In my experience, you always have to sit with it and go through it and integrate all that deep emotional feeling and healing. But man, it can be done. So that was, yeah, it's been probably 7 years now since I started meditating. And I treat it like a full-time job, man. Like I honestly saw myself as being so detrimental to my kids and my wife that I did everything I could. And yeah, it was like full-time. I can literally see points in my life and my business where other things suffered because I was so focused on unscrewing myself. And it's all been for the good. But man, that's the kind of dedication that I personally needed, because that's how bad I was suffering. Like I needed it to end, and it was like, okay, I'll just spend hours every day working on myself.
Wow. That's a powerful story. I mean, being dedicated to the point where you treat it like a full-time job. And that's, I agree with you that, us men, healing our wounds, our trauma, like it feels like that's the work of the day for the men of our generation. I'm assuming that we're close in age. I'm 40. But that feels like the work. I'm not sure how most men feel, but it's like the things that trigger me, my son reflects them perfectly. And it's like, I trying to, do the breath works and the plant medicines and like, there's so many different tools and techniques that can be used. And it's like, now we have no excuses with the internet and all the information. Nobody has any excuse to not try and fix, whatever the issues are that's, plaguing them. So it's good to hear your dedication for that, for your children and family first and foremost. And now bringing that to men in your community, that's just awesome.
Yeah, thanks, man.
You said you guys picked up and moved to Thailand and Bulgaria. That's one thing that, like, it's a dream of mine to be, I'm like location independent, whatever they call it nowadays. Share that experience, and what was that like with a family and kids? Because I'm sure there's a lot of men out there that are like, I can't do that with one kid, let alone two,
Yeah. Yeah, man. It was well, it was great because I've been working online. I've been working online for, 2 or 3 years at that point. And I was always like, "Oh, one of these days I want to make use of this. I want to have enough money to just be able to travel and work wherever I wanted." And I was looking at it, I was like, wait a second, like I can literally work wherever, whenever I want. This is, the point of all of this. And this is the blessings that I've received from having built this internet business. Like, I'm pretty sure we can just do it now. And so let's try it. And I always thought, I would probably go to Europe or South America. I had no real interest in Asia for some reason. And I just Googled, like, I think digital nomad is what I Googled. And I just like, okay, let's see where people go. And so this video came up on YouTube from Chiang Mai in Thailand, in northern Thailand. And it looked amazing. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. And I looked into it, and it was like this digital nomad hub of other guys building online businesses. And it was like just a great place to be from all that I could see online. And so we actually booked like a coaching call with an expat couple who lived there, and, asked a couple questions. And 3 months later, we were there. And that's just sort of how we roll, right? It's just like, make the decision, it's right, go with your gut, and then just, be ruthless in executing. So that worked out really well. And I remember the first day being there, I was like, okay, sweet, this is awesome. And then this thought came, like, I don't even know where to go get food. I don't know where to get groceries. Like, how am I going to eat? Oh my goodness. This is like the stuff that you don't think about until you're actually there. And again, I don't know, my oldest was 3 and my youngest was 1. So we were sort of mid-20s by this point. And yeah, it was terrifying. You're suddenly almost like completely isolated, because you're in a country that's not yours. You want to be respectful of that. You want to, like, you're very aware that you are not in, the community,
On
you're
campus
very
anymore.
externalized. Yeah, like it's very clear that you're not one of them because I'm not from Asia, and I'm a
Mhm.
Caucasian dude, and that's just different. And so thankfully, I mean, Thailand is incredible. Like the people are so friendly, the attitude there is so kind, and they were very helpful. And in this time, within the first month, I did a terrible thing, which is I stopped doing all of my habits that were keeping me mentally healthy. I stopped meditating, I stopped journaling, I stopped going to the gym, I stopped working for the first couple of weeks, so just going to chill. And then like those were the scaffolding upon which I was building my sort of calm demeanor. And I
Mhm.
wasn't that calm yet because it had only been a little bit before or since I'd been meditating, but it all came tumbling down. And I remember my kids were upset at something, and of course we just moved them across the world, away from the grandparents, away from everything they knew, so of course they're going to be having huge feelings about this. Makes sense now. But I was overwhelmed when they were overwhelmed. And the screaming, I was like, you got to stop. I was trying to make them stop screaming. I was overwhelmed, and I would just get, again, mean and miserable and vicious. And I can just recall, like, the first month I found myself like lying on this concrete floor, because the floors are concrete. It's much cooler in the summer. It's super hot there. And I was just like bawling my eyes out and like pounding on this concrete floor because I was screwing up so bad again and again. And I had this question, like, why can't I do better? Like, why do I keep screwing up? And it's the exact same things every single time. Like, you'd think I'd be able to catch it, and I couldn't. And so that was probably the first moment that I understood just how heavily I was going to have to invest in myself, because it kept coming up over and over. And if I didn't sort out the underlying why, I couldn't understand how I'd be able to catch myself in the moment, because here I was, thinking I got some tools. And as soon as I stopped doing them every day, I was like, oh no, like I'm going to screw up my kids so badly. And, my wife's trying to hold it together for the kids and, being supportive of me, even though I don't no idea why she was continuing to. I'm so thankful that she was continuing to be with me. But that was sort of like within the first month. As we got better, as we started doing our habits again, the meditation and all that kind of stuff, and learned a little bit more of the language and how to go and eat somewhere and like what to even do, because like we
Mhm.
didn't know. It was like a couple of months before we left and we didn't plan anything. It started to settle in, and everything, man, every little like small thing is magnified like 100 times when you're overseas, because you can't just fall back on the things you used to do. You have to like sort out everything from first principles, basically. Like the kid has a tantrum somewhere. It's like, okay, we can't just go back to the car because we don't have a car. We can't just like go let them play in the grass because there's not a lot of grass fields there. We're out and we have no idea where we are. We've got to flag down this truck and hope that, there's not a million people in the back of it because our kids are having a tantrum. We got to get home. Like all of these things are just, oh my goodness, so much harder when you don't even know like the basics of the culture. And so it was both wonderful, adventurous, and extremely difficult. And like I said earlier, it was like 20 years worth of parenting and life in two. And so I feel like that was a very key point in our growth as a family, being put up against sort of the grindstone like that every single day. And
Right.
it's really raw, right? Like there's a hard parts, but then all the exploring and the adventure, like that's not something we get in this culture very much. There's not a lot that's new, undiscovered, awe-inspiring. And yet here we were going to like mountaintop temples, and we were like going into the old city, into markets, and we were like haggling with locals, and like, wow, that is incredible. It's such an amazing experience.
Right. Right.
And what I hope is that my kids will now know that they can do whatever they want in life. They have lived experience, that they don't have to just get a 9 to 5 and, travel when they're retired. And, it doesn't have to be exactly travel. It could be anything they want, but I hope that they'll remember that, we lived a life and we continue to live a life that is what we want to do within the confines of making sure everyone in the family is, healthy, safe, and well taken care of. We get to decide. We don't just live on inertia, we live on intention. And I hope that's a lesson they take with them, because man, it was incredible, challenging, and I wouldn't have changed it for anything.
Beautiful. That's awesome. And yeah, and what an experience to give your children. You mentioned the support of your wife. What does that look like, in establishing these new habits and falling off and getting back on the cart, you know, what's the role your wife plays and what's that dynamic look like?
Yeah, I honestly only figured this out like a couple months ago in my reflections from this question. And the most important thing that she was able to do was come back to me after I had had a blow up, because that's usually how it came about. I'd blow up at her or the kids, and she would always come back and let me know that she was there for me and that it was okay. And at the time, it was almost impossible for me to accept that, because in my head, I knew I needed to be punished. That was my self-talk, like, oh, great, you've messed up. The only thing you're good for now is to be punished, so you know how badly you screwed up. And that's, I think a lot of guys can relate to that. Is just like, I deserve to be punished. There's this like pity, there is this shame, there is this guilt. And I had a very difficult time accepting non-punishment from her. And yet it was that, like, it was that, oil in the gears for me that kept me trying and trying and trying. She just, if she had to set a boundary, or if she had to be angry back at me, she would always come back when I was like, miserable, lying on my bed, wishing that, I could just go away. She would always come back and just be supportive. Like, hey, I'm still here for you. It's going to be okay. I know how hard this is for you. So she validated, she affirmed, she empathized, and she supported. And that, looking back, was like absolutely fundamental. And I don't know how she found it in herself to do that, because I was miserable. I was mean to her and the kids. And yet here she was doing that. So she played a vital role and continues to play a vital role in me, and has always supported with unwavering loyalty anything that I do for the good of the family. When I have had years of business where it's like, I don't even know how I'm going to make ends meet. I don't know what's going on this year. Things are different all of a sudden. And she's like, oh, I know you're going to figure it out. And like, that amount of trust and love and compassion, and just being able as well to dive deep into all these issues. Because I think part of it was she saw me doing the work. So in my defense, I was always like, hey, I'm going to get better. Like, this won't happen again. And I would get, it would happen again and again and again. But I was always like, it ain't going to happen again. I'm going to figure this out this time. So she'd see me meditate. She'd see me journal. I'd ask her questions like, why do you think we're like this? Oh, this reminds me of that time when we were kids when this happened. And then I was like, oh, there's like mother wounds and father wounds. And so we both started dealing with our own healing process. And we were both like our biggest cheerleaders for each other. And that was really cool, to do the work when we didn't even know we were doing the work. It was just like, oh, this is an interesting thing that's come up for me. Let's talk about it. And I really appreciate her, her intellect. Honestly, she's very smart. She's very discerning and very thoughtful, and helps me process my own stuff, and then is okay with me sort of helping her process her stuff. And so it's just a wonderful relationship like that. And I don't exactly know how it worked out so well, because we connected in a way that I would say is sort of trauma bonded. Our own inner children were looking for one another, and they were like, oh, sweet, somebody to play off of. And I was like, Mr. Cold Hard, you're never going to get past my defenses.
Yeah.
And, she kept trying to get past my defenses because it would be cool if she did that. And like, we just connected on that. And for some reason, this is completely mind blowing to me, we grew in the same direction. And I think it's just too often that, a couple might grow, one person might grow, the other might not. And that's, a recipe for disaster. But sometimes if they both grow, they realize they're really far apart where they end up going. And so, thankfully for us, we've grown in the right direction. But it was this constant teasing back and forth of like, okay, what's here for you? Okay, well, what about this? And we just sort of like kept doing our work with conversation, and as much love as we could muster throughout the difficult times. And yeah, man, it's just been amazing. And now we just had our 10th anniversary, and it's literally better than ever. And I didn't know it could get this way, because I always hear people going like, well, one day it's not as good anymore. And, you start to check out, and it's like, no, not at all. We are so tight now, and we're so close now, that it's beautiful. And I wish that more people, not just men, but I wish more people understood how good it can get if you put the work in and if you make a commitment.
Yeah, that's beautiful to hear. A reciprocal relationship and growing closer together. That's something to be celebrated. And I commend you both for putting in the work to do that.
Yeah, thanks, man.
I obviously mentioned before, you found Dad.work you're the founder of Dad.work, where you're helping men with mental health, addiction, depression. On your website, you put wokeism, and providing them tools, practices and wisdom. Just wanted to, delve into that, and what's your mission, what's your goal, and what do you have going on there?
Yeah, thanks, man. I got to a point in my journey where it felt like just couldn't help but share this with people. Because like I said before, I like became a man, basically. That was my journey. I felt like a little boy for my entire adult life until I finally admitted, wow, I feel like a little boy. And I wish that my mom and dad were there for me. And like, what do I do now? Like, holy smokes, that was a huge pill to swallow. And I had to grieve significantly because I was just like subconsciously holding on to this idea that I could maybe get that. And I think that's what we're all doing when we're in our wounded space. We're longing for this like parental love that we will literally never get because we are grown ass men. Like that's hard to swallow because you have to let go of that hope. No booze, no woman, no job, no money is ever going to fill that hole that your parents left. No matter how good they were, you'll always perceive something that they did was wrong or they didn't love you exactly right. And until we can accept that and then like grieve it and then move on, I don't think we can get to be like mature men. And so that was my journey. And as I got through that other side, I was like, man, this stuff works. I don't know how I figured this out, but it works. Wouldn't it be sweet if like other men didn't have to suffer and like come close to suicide in my case? And I know a lot of men like do commit suicide, and that's tragic. So like maybe I can put this together in a way that other men can get hope and that they can start doing some of the stuff that I did. I'm not an expert. I just unfucked my own life, to be very blunt, and like maybe I can help other men do the same. And I think like the last step of Alcoholics Anonymous is like you just get to this point where you have to share with other people. That's what I was feeling. And I've been thinking about this for about 3 or 4 years. And I remember talking to a friend on the way to Moab to do some mountain biking. I was like, I think one day I see myself like giving talks, maybe in like, the TEDx stage or the TED stage or whatever, on how to be a better dad. And not just like, here's the tactics to be a good father, but like you have to become a good man before you can be a good father. And that was my journey. It wasn't parenting strategy. It wasn't like parenting tips. It was, I had to like become a good man and be good with myself, and everything else followed. Better husband, better father, but I had to get right with me first. And so, time went on and I thought about it, wrote a couple of posts on a website, didn't really share them, wasn't really in the right space to do it. And eventually got into men's work and men's group, grew a bit as a leader there and was able to run men's groups. And in that sort of leadership training, if you will, I got very confident in my ability to lead and very confident in my ability to help and to change lives. And so I finally got the courage to say, okay, I'm just going to try this. And it wasn't the first thing that I tried because I was still scared. I was going to launch a local business, a local like in-person services business that it was going to be like online, digital, super amazing, and just crush the local competition. And I got like 2 days before launch and basically had a panic attack because I'd been ignoring the signs that it was all wrong. And I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. That's a huge other story, I guess. But I tried something else first. And in the back of my head, I was like, I should really do that dad thing. It's like, no, you got to do this in-person thing because you got to prove to yourself that you're a real businessman, not just like some online fly-by-night, whatever. And I wanted to prove to myself from my ego that I could do it another way. And, I pulled the plug on that. Huge loss to me. My first so-called failure that I had ever sort of admitted to. That's a byproduct of perfectionism and always playing it safe. But I sort of came to myself and slowed down and integrated all these lessons that I had been running from for years. And with the help of other men around me, mentors, coaches, my men's group, I was like, okay, it's time. Like I'm now ready. And I have got this failure under my belt now that shows me that I can trust my intuition when I didn't think I could. So I got into that. And I just start sharing, meditations, things that I've journaled about that help me, like questions that guys don't typically ask themselves about going deep, shadow work, all this kind of stuff, mother wounds, father wounds, all the work that I've done. I was just like, hey guys, have you heard of this? Like, why don't you try this? It's pretty sweet. I ended up putting together this like 14-day email course, and it's basically like all the stuff that I've done packaged down into like 2 weeks. And it gives you at least an overview of all the places to look. Because like I said before, I didn't even know meditation existed. I didn't know healing existed. And so if my thought was, if I can just like tell people that if they want to become a better man, partner, and father, like here are some places to look, they might open their perspective and be like, oh, I had no idea. Like, okay, meditation sounds good. I'm going to go do that. Or journaling sounds good. Let me do that. Or like, oh, I can't communicate without starting a fight. I better read these books because, oh man, it would be so nice to be able to be like, nonviolent communication. Here's what I'm observing. Here's my feeling. Here's what need I have. Like, here's a request. Oh, that's so much better than just fighting all the time. So I'm just trying to put out stuff there that will help people on their own journeys. And then it got to a point where I was like, I think we got to do this men's work for dads, because I'd been running men's group. It changed my life. And so I thought like community is so important. I'm going to see if we can do that for dads, because I had seen a lot of guys on Instagram, for example, who are like single, childless, and they were like, oh dude, just get into the flow, like become one with the universe. You'll be so chill. You have like a 4-hour morning routine. And it's like, bro, you don't get it. And on the other side, I saw a lot of dads who were like, the typical slapstick American dad on TV who's like, sports, man caves. Hey, this is cool, man. Like, just be a dad, be a bro. It's like, there's got to be a middle point where we combine the dad stuff and the like men's stuff. And so that's why, Dad.work is men's work for dads. And we launched men's groups. We've got 2 full men's groups now. Actually today, as we're recording, I'm launching the online community portion called The Village. And we got a course. And we're just doing everything we can to try to bring the bits of pieces that I learned over the last 7 years doing this work, or I guess longer than that now, bringing it together in such a way that other people will suffer less than I did, because it was a very long and very painful journey. And if sharing what worked for me can stop one man from going down like the rabbit hole of pain that I went down, it will have been worth it. And it seems to be working that way. And I'm very grateful to be able to do this work for 2 reasons. One is on the micro level. When I can have a man who tells me that this has changed his life, that's the most beautiful thing in the world, because his life changing will change his children's lives. And seeing my own impact on my kids and how detrimental it can be if you don't sort yourself out, like I don't want that for anyone. And being the child of divorced parents, I don't want that on anyone. So if I can make someone's life better, like, yeah, of course, that's going to be amazing for me. Right. On the more selfish side and on the macro side, I want to live in a world that is created by people whose father wounds are minimal. And what I mean by that is, if I can help, like, I don't know, over the next 10 years, if we can reach 1 million dads and they have, two kids each, and that's like 2 million kids, when those kids have their own kids, so like 2 generations from now, they're going to be parenting in a different way. Mm-hmm. And those kids who grow up with kids who had healed fathers are not going to be burdened by the wounds of the past generations. And if we have a world where the leaders and the children don't have those wounds, we're going to have a way more peaceful, loving, empathetic, and just wonderful world. So that's where I want to live. That's the world I want to live in. And if I can create it by helping one guy at a time, like, let's go to it. So that's my sort of selfish reason. But I think there's sort of, it's selfish and selfless at the same time, but that's what we're doing.
Beautiful. That's definitely a worthwhile goal to shoot for. So first, I guess I'm kind of getting stuck here for a second. I wanted to touch on one last thing. Like you mentioned like wokeism on your website, and like I heard you talk about toxic masculinity. For any man that's listening, what would you tell that guy who believes that their masculinity is toxic?
Man, this is such a big one, and I think an important one. And I just did an episode on this in my podcast. But I think the idea that masculinity is toxic is this idea that what we see in society and what is called masculinity is bad, hurtful, and harmful. And I think actually that that's not wrong. I think that what
Yeah.
we call masculinity, though, is not true masculinity. And so if someone says that, masculinity is toxic, what they're saying is the childish, immature version of a boy in a man's body can lead to toxic behavior. And that's 100% true. But that doesn't mean that masculinity is bad, in the same way that, people saying that the woes created by capitalism mean that capitalism are bad. Like, okay, what's the alternative? The woes created by any other form of, government or economy are way worse. And so let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's fix the underlying thing and let's see what a mature version of that system looks like. And so in masculinity, I think it's still a worthy ideal. It's just that almost no man on earth today has ever hit it. And what we're seeing is the leadership, especially in the leadership, is a bunch of wounded little boys who are taking out their pain on other people in positions of power so that they can feel better inside. And this is what I was saying before. You can't fill up the pain of your mother and your father wound by having power, by having money, by drinking, by driving fast cars, any of those things. You got to do the work. You got to ask yourself, why does it hurt? What do I feel and why? And then go deep into that and try and feel what you feel, and then go through them and grieve and cry and express the emotions and be held by other men and be supported and challenged. Like, this is our work. And so it's not that masculinity is toxic. It's that the immature version of masculinity, it results in toxic behavior, and that's totally legit. But let's not say then that men are bad. Let's not say that men and boys are toxic. That's such bad messaging, because what does a guy hear when he hears that? Masculinity is bad. I think I'm a masculine guy. Oh no, therefore I'm bad. And I'm really hoping that, like, the reporting of this is overblown. And I hope that not a lot of men really think that about themselves, but I know that some do. Right. I know that some get into this position where they're like, oh, I've got to repent. I'm bad for being a man. And this is sort of like the critical theory issue, where people are like, oppressors by the virtue of the system or the class they belong to. And I think that's total BS. Like, you've got to take responsibility for being the man in your individual life. And if you can get better as a man in your life, then, whether or not your forefathers or most other men are like that has no indication on how you should live your life. And if you can help other men become maturely masculine, then great. But, like, you're not bad just because you were born a man. That doesn't make you bad. And shame, man, toxic shame is deadly, especially in young boys, especially in adolescent boys. When you internalize the idea that you are bad, especially because of something you can't control, oh man, like that's a shame spiral that's going to be very difficult to get out of. So I want to be very sure that, yes, we can, make sure that these toxic behaviors do not go on, and that we don't promote them. And we got to be very careful that sort of the alpha, macho, unfeeling man is not what we think of when we think about men. But we also have to go the other way and go, like, men being women is not masculine, and that's not cool either. Right. So where do we find the middle ground? I think that being a good, mature man is, especially in the fatherhood context, is being supportive yet challenging. It's being able to feel deeply into your emotions and your heart and love and be gentle, and at the same time be dangerous as fuck. Like, be ready to kill at a moment's notice for your family, and to sit in the grounded center between those two spaces, and then have the discernment to know when to use each extreme. And I think there's like a Maasai tribe in Africa who have this saying, or at least there was an elder who said this to a man who was living with him for a while. He said, a good man can be gentle as a kitten and lie down with the babes. A good man can kill at a moment's notice and defend his territory and defend his family. And a great man knows which moment is which. And it's like, I think that is right. I think there's something true about that, where you can be gentle and vicious and then know what arena requires each of you. And so I think that should be our goal of masculinity, not this, power over. I think men have power, but I think we should have a power to influence, not power over people. And I think that would be a much healthier masculinity, which is completely not toxic, and in fact would do the world a lot of good.
Beautiful. I typically like to end with one last question, and I'm going to preface asking it by what you just summed up to me, and like you mentioned before, you can't be a good father if you're not a good man. And everything that you just summed up, a great man is knowing the difference of, when you need to be, the killer and when not to, etc. Like everything is right on point. And my last question I typically like to end with is, how would you define a Hall of Fame father? And is there anything that you would add to what you just summed up?
Ooh, that's a great question, by the way. I often have guys in my men's group. I ask them like, okay, why are you here? And a lot of them say, oh, I want to be a good dad, good man. And I was like, guys, that's BS. Like, tell me what that means. And so this is a fantastic question. And I think for me, everything I just said and everything I've talked about in this podcast already, but it is the man who takes responsibility to do his own work, realizing that only in becoming a good man can he become a better father and husband, and who has the ability to both meet his kids on an emotional, empathetic, validating, affirming level, while at the same time challenging them to be the best version of themselves without coddling them, and answering the question that John Eldridge says each boy needs to have answered, which is, do I have what it takes? Am I good enough? And that's like ensuring that they do hard shit, challenging them, going on adventures with them, and at the end of the day, loving the shit out of them. Like that combination of challenge and support, that's what I'm aiming for. And so that's what I think, that's Hall of Fame fatherhood.
Awesome. Love the answer. I couldn't agree more. Curt, again, I know you mentioned you just launched the Village. I believe it was yesterday. Is there anything else that you want to put out there for any listeners? And
well, everything's on our website, which is Dad.work. So instead of .com, it's just a .work. So DAD.WORK. We got a podcast on my Instagram actively. We've got the men's group, which is, I think, full by now. And we've got the Village, which is just launching. It's an online community for brotherhood and training. We're going to have expert-led workshops. We're going to have monthly calls. We're going to have Q&A sessions. We've got an online discussion forum, access to my courses and everything like that. And it's just a way to like intentionally do your work that we've been talking about with other men. Because if I had any other man in my life that I could have talked to about this over the last 7 years, like, man, it would have been a different game for me. So that's the whole point. And you know what, if you just want to follow on Instagram and listen to the podcast, I hope that changes your life too. But those are all the places to connect.
wonderful. I thank you for joining me today, and hopefully we can do a round two someday. And
Yeah, man.
look forward to following your work.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for doing this, because I know your story is worth sharing as well. So I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thanks, Curt. Have a great one.
You too.